All right, so we are live and welcome everyone on Facebook and YouTube. Welcome everyone who's joining us on Zoom today and those of you who are joining. Thank you, thank you. We are coming here from Florida and we have a special speaker today named Peter Terry. I'd like to, before we go on, just say that this gentleman is doing another course with us on Wednesdays. Started on April 27. It's an amazing course. You should check it out. It's about the Persian Bayan. And that's a separate study course we're doing. You can find it on clearwaterbaha'is.org. With that being said, we've got another very important topic to talk about. But before that, before we discuss the topic, Ukraine and the millions of Ukrainian refugees and Baha'u'llah's solution to such a problem of many crises that are bound to occur, we are going to introduce you our speaker, Peter Terry. Mr. Peter Terry holds a bachelor's degree in international education, grades K through 8 from the University of Massachusetts. And he has a master's degree in vocal performance from the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. By the way, Peter, I had someone share with me Peter Terry opera, something like that on YouTube. You're on YouTube. You're YouTube famous, Peter.
Yes, I am on YouTube. It's true.
It's pretty good. I had no clue. Peter Terry sings, everybody. Not just sings, he sings like the professional stuff. He also began a PhD program, by the way, at the University of Chicago and the Bachelor of Music program at Oberlin College. His areas of specialized knowledge include a pedagogical theory and practice, Western classical music, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, Babi, and Baha'i history and scripture. His published books include Proofs of the Prophets, Companion to Proofs of the Prophets, Lord Krishna, Proofs of the Prophets, The Case for Baha'u'llah, in his own words, A Prophet in Modern Times, Proofs for the Existence of God, Volume 2, Global Faith book series. You can find that, by the way, on Amazon. So I can go more, but Peter told me to introduce you all to the concept that he is a father of a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old, right, Peter?
That's correct.
Yes. So he is a very, very honored father to 2 children, and maybe he'll have more. We never know. And that being said, there is one last point to bring up, which is our topic today. Lately, as the minds and hearts of many Baha'is and world citizens have turned to the war in Ukraine and the millions of Ukrainian refugees, it might be time, we believe today, at the very least, for someone to speak about Baha'u'llah's solution to such a problem and how relevant his counsels are to humanity today. And we have on the link here in clearwaterbaha'is.org, we have on the link here a beautiful article by David Langness on Baha'iTeachings.org, The Baha'i Faith's Warnings About War. And if you'd like to check that out, it's online on Baha'iTeachings.org. But besides that further reading, we welcome you all to listen as we have our great speaker here, Peter Terry, to talk about this subject. Please take note and share this because a lot of people are asking this question, and here's an answer.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning and to consider this very timely and really perennial subject. Human beings have been, and people of faith in particular, have been very concerned with how to approach the actual removal of war from the world for a very long time and propose various solutions, none of which obviously have worked. And I wanted to begin briefly by telling you a personal story. when I was a young man, a teenager in school, in high school, I was facing the draft. And at that time, I was a pacifist. And I've been a pacifist. I had been a pacifist, for quite some time. And so I applied to become a conscientious objector. And as it was, we had the lottery, and so I was never chosen, and I didn't have to serve in any capacity. But it made me really think about, what do you believe in, and what is your solution to, even in a very small personal manner, responding to the issue of war? And what happened subsequently is that I was really convinced of pacifism very, very long time. And it was probably the encounter of a particular comment that Abdu'l-Baha made in some answered questions that started me thinking in a different way than I had before. And what he did in one of his talks is say that the sheep are very happy and healthy and live long lives as long as there's no wolf. If there's a wolf, then who's going to stop the wolf from eating the sheep? And Abdu'l-Baha used this as an example of why the pure pacifist solution really can't work. Gandhi had to face this in the Second World War because he knew that what Hitler and Mussolini and the Emperor of Japan were doing was an evil project, and that it had to be stopped, and that it couldn't be stopped by people offering themselves as a sacrifice, as they had very successfully in persuading the British Empire to leave India. The British people were a different sort of people from the people who were invading countries in Europe one after the other and conquering them. So we're facing a similar situation now. Russia has for a long time considered territories outside of its immediate boundaries as part of their sphere of influence, and sometimes part of their actual empire. And Mr. Putin has decided that he is going to take over one of the areas that used to be part of the empire, and was then also became part of the USSR. And what's very interesting about this conflict is that it's a perfect example of why pacifism by itself is not successful. We can express ourselves, we can send food and clothing and various other things to the victims. We can welcome them into our homes as refugees, but we can't stop the aggressor unless we're willing to use force. So I want to read you some passages from the writings of Baha'u'llah so that you will understand that Baha'u'llah had a very specific answer to all wars, because all wars begin with one country invading another. There's an aggressor. And then the friends of the country that are invaded sometimes will defend, and then you really get going and atrocities happen on both sides. But in the beginning, every war starts with one nation invading, crossing the border into another and trying to take over or damage in some way that other nation. Now, here is the solution of Baha'u'llah, and he called it the lesser peace. And I'm not going to read these in any particular order, but I'll tell you now that they come from some specific sources, and I will send this paper to Clearwater Baha'is, to Jeremiah and John. And if anybody would like to read it, of course, you're welcome to do so and welcome to share it with anybody that you wish. So I begin with this. O kings of the earth, he says, in one of his tablets to the kings, we see you increasing every year your expenditures and laying the burden thereof on your subjects. This verily is wholly and grossly unjust. Fear the sighs and tears of this wronged one, and lay not excessive burdens on your peoples. Do not rob them to rear palaces for yourselves. Nay, rather choose for them that which ye choose for yourselves. Thus we unfold to your eyes that which profiteth you, if ye but perceive. Your people are your treasures. Beware lest your rule violate the commandments of God, and ye deliver your wards to the hands of the robber. By them ye rule, by their means ye subsist, by their aid ye conquer. Yet how disdainfully you look upon them. How strange, how very strange. Now that ye have refused the most great peace, hold ye fast unto this, the lesser peace, that haply ye may in some degree better your own condition and that of your dependents. O rulers of the earth, be reconciled among yourselves, that ye may need no more armaments save in a measure to safeguard your territories and dominions. Beware lest ye disregard the counsel of the all-knowing, the faithful. Be united, O kings of the earth, for thereby will the tempest of discord be stilled amongst you, and your peoples will find rest if ye be of them that comprehend. Should any one among you take up arms against another, rise ye all against him, for this is naught but manifest justice. Thus did we exhort you in the tablets sent down aforetime, and we admonish you again to follow that which hath been revealed by him who is the Almighty, the All-Wise. Should anyone seek refuge with you, extend unto him your protection and betray him not. Thus doth the pen of the Most High counsel you, as bidden by him who is the all-knowing, the all-informed. This is taken, this passage is found in Gleanings, in The Promised Day is Come, and also in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts. Now, there are two other passages that I'd like to read, and the reason is that when you read them side by side, you see that Baha'u'llah is reiterating certain basic themes, and those themes comprise his solution to the eradication of war. So the second passage is from one of the tablets revealed after the Kitab-i-Aqdas. And in that tablet, Baha'u'llah lists numerically a number of major teachings that need to be implemented. And this one is very interesting because it addresses the Universal House of Justice. Because Baha'u'llah envisions a very central role for the Universal House of Justice in promoting the lesser peace. These are his words. First, it is incumbent upon the ministers of the House of Justice to promote the lesser peace so that the people of the earth may be relieved from the burden of exorbitant expenditures. This matter is imperative and absolutely essential, inasmuch as hostilities and conflict lie at the root of affliction and calamity. Now, the third passage is taken from the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, which, as you all know, was Baha'u'llah's last major work, and it quoted many of his previously revealed tablets. In some ways, it's similar to Baha'u'llah's compilation of his major writings and teachings. So I want to cite this one also because it does contain some details not found in the two previous passages. So I begin. We pray God, exalted be his glory, and cherish the hope that he may graciously assist the manifestations of affluence and power and the day springs of sovereignty and glory, the kings of the earth. May God aid them through his strengthening grace to establish the lesser peace. This indeed is the greatest means for ensuring the tranquility of the nations. It is incumbent upon the sovereigns of the world, may God assist them, unitedly to hold fast unto this peace, which is the chief instrument for the protection of all mankind. It is our hope that they will arise to achieve what will be conducive to the well-being of man. It is their duty to convene an all-inclusive assembly, which either they themselves or their ministers will attend, and to enforce whatever measures are required to establish unity and concord amongst men. They must put away the weapons of war and turn to the instruments of universal reconstruction. Should any king rise up against another, all the other kings must arise to deter him. Arms and armaments will then be no more needed beyond that which is necessary to ensure the internal security of their respective countries. If they attain unto this all-surpassing blessing, the people of each nation will pursue with tranquility and contentment their own occupations, and the groanings and lamentations of most men will be silenced. We beseech God to aid them to do his will and pleasure. He verily is the Lord of the throne on high and of earth below, and the Lord of this world and of the world to come. It would be preferable and more fitting that the highly honored kings themselves should attend such an assembly and proclaim their edicts. Any king who will arise and carry out this task, he verily will, in the sight of God, become the cynosure of all kings. Happy is he, and great is his blessedness. In this land, every time men are conscripted for the army, a great terror seizeth the people. Every nation augmenteth each year its forces, for their ministers of war are insatiable in their desire to add fresh recruits to their battalions. We have learned that the government of Persia, may God assist them, have likewise decided to reinforce their army. In the opinion of this wronged one, a force of 100,000 fully equipped and well-disciplined men would suffice. We hope that thou wilt cause the light of justice to shine more brightly. By the righteousness of God, justice is a powerful force. It is above all else the conqueror of the citadels of the hearts and souls of men, and the revealer of the secrets of the world of being, and the standard bearer of love and bounty. So I wanted to look at each one of these components, because this is a whole program. This is not just one action. Obviously, the center of that action is rise ye against him, right? That all leaders of the world, of all nations, should rise up and stop an aggressor. And that is the way that there will be an end to wars, is because eventually, with the knowledge that the entire population of the world will be opposed to him, no no government, no leader of government will dare to invade another country. And so this is one. Another thing that you've noticed is that Baha'u'llah also talks about this multiplication of armaments that are being accumulated by the different nations. Well, that isn't necessary if all of the nations are taking responsibility to stamp out an aggressor and not allow him to have his way with another country. You don't have to have always more and more armaments to do that. Another point that he makes is he's talking about internal security, which is we might regard as something similar to a police force. So he says that every nation does need to have internal security. And he also says that every nation needs to safeguard its territories and dominions, which means something like secure its borders. So another thing that he talks about in this field is conscripts. He talks about how the people of many nations are very disturbed because the government is constantly asking for their young men usually, but you know, in our age, it's also their young women to in the, you know, the bloom of their youth to have to go and consecrate themselves to taking up arms against some nation. This is one of the things he also brings up, is how this would be stilled. There would not be the need to have many conscripts for your armies if you're not engaging in war, if you are basically securing your borders and promoting the internal peace of your realm. And I think one of the things that we also need to pay attention here is the burden, financial burden, the taxes. Baha'u'llah nails this, and he says, if, and in every one of these quotes, he talks about you can diminish the expenditures that are basically raised from the people of your country if you're not engaged in war, and if you're stopping every aggressor so that you're not in a position where you have to, you know, one nation or two nations or a small coalition is doing all the work of deterring aggression. Now, in conclusion, Baha'u'llah repeatedly refers this solution to the principle of justice. And I'm sure you noticed that his point is the last line in which he is addressing this. He talks about how it affects the world and our relationships with each other. He says, justice is a powerful force. It is above all else the conqueror of the citadels of the hearts and souls of men, and the revealer of the secrets of the world of being, and the standard bearer of love and bounty. So as you see, this is not simply a pragmatic choice of finding a solution that can eliminate conflict of a military variety. This is a big picture, and in the big picture, this is part of the whole process of establishing the kingdom of God on earth, of establishing the world commonwealth, of establishing a society in which there will be no war, in which human beings will be involved in cooperating and helping one another and loving one another rather than hating and fighting one another. That's been the dream of that's been shared by every prophet with the people. And this is the day in which it will be realized, because we do have the promise from Baha'u'llah that the lesser peace will be established, and eventually the most great peace will be established as well. It will take whatever time it requires, but it will happen. So I hope that I have shared with you this solution to the eradication of war. I hope I have done it in a clear manner, and that it will inspire you to ask questions and inspire some back and forth here. I believe that it's important to share some information in the beginning when you're giving a talk, and then allow for a great deal of elaboration afterwards. So with that, I leave the forum to whoever is going to be taking your questions.
So I have one question. How do we as a human society move forward with our plurality of thought today through this lesser peace to the most great peace? How do we establish this camaraderie that we need to move forward?
Well, that's a very good question, John. And consider what the House of Justice has asked us to do. Create devotionals in your homes and invite your neighbors to them. Well, that's the beginning. Now, if it may seem like it's very far removed from the grand, from the big picture and nations stopping war, but that's not necessarily the case. If you look at the history of big changes happening in humanity, they've all started very small. When the people of Iran decided that they were really fed up with the Shah and all the money he was taking from them, and then building his expensive projects, and they started talking amongst each other about what to do. And it didn't take very long for them to decide that they wanted to create a republic, and a republic that represented their views, their beliefs, and their values. And if we look also, we were in this country, we're 13 colonies of the most independent, pig-headed people you can imagine. That's our ancestors had a lot of moxie, you know. They weren't happy to stay at home. They wanted to go to the other side of the world to get away from whoever they were living with and to try something different. And the fact that this bunch of people who so often disagreed with each other, they were different religious denominations, they were different classes, in many cases, they wouldn't have spoken to each other when they were living in England. This batch of people got together and said, we don't want to be ruled by the British Empire anymore. We're done. We want to rule ourselves. And here we are, centuries later, the most powerful, the richest, and the most liberty-loving country on the planet. That's what happened, and it started very, very small. And some of you have relatives who were around in those days, and so maybe you have stories that have passed down from generation to generation about, you know, what people thought at the time. But if you read their letters, you find out they didn't believe that they had much of a chance, but they were going to give it their all because they believed it was the right thing. So I think as Baha'is, one of the ways we can contribute to this is to do these devotionals in our homes, because our fellowship with other people, not of the same faith, different faiths, different nations, different races, different backgrounds, different income levels. The more we invite those people to join us and to think about the big picture think about God and think about the teachings of God and think about the love of God and share devotion. The more we do this, the more people we touch in a very personal manner. And then as far as having an impact, we have a whole department of the NSA, which is devoted to external affairs. We have a public information office. We have, for liaison with the United Nations, we have the Baha'i international community. Our faith is very much engaged in sharing the Baha'i vision on every topic. We don't need to worry about that. But we do need to do this at the local level because you know what? The members of the Universal House of Justice can't do that. That's something we can do that they can't do. And so we all have to be helping hands in bringing this about. And the more we embrace the means that are at our disposal that are not difficult to implement, the better it's going to go. You know, for a long time, Baha'i communities were very eager to buy or build centers. And then many of these communities found that after spending a lot of money building a center, they didn't have very many activities going on. So the center was empty most of the time. So I think it's absolutely wonderful that the emphasis now is not on building things, it's not on construction, it's on bring it home and do it from your hearth, from your kitchen table, because that's where we can best touch the hearts of other people. And also the best way that we can show them that we are sincere, that we're not just pie in the sky utopians, but we live by the teachings of Baha'u'llah. So if I give answers like that to each question, we will be, I'll only be able to talk to one or two other people. So I'll try to keep it shorter next time.
Well, thank you so much for that answer. I appreciate it. I have something to point out that for the sources discussed today, Jeremiah posted it here on the Zoom. Please take a look at it. The blog that we have on clearwaterbaha'is.org, where you have all the resources. Joan McGovern has a question. She says, would you cite your sources again? I got to Gleanings and Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, but I missed one or two others.
Yes, I'm happy to do so. But I also wanted to, I want to point out that that you can, I'd be very happy to send this paper, which has all of the sources cited in it. I could send that to Clearwater Baha'is, and then anybody who would like to receive a copy, it can just be forwarded to your email. So the first passage is found in Summons of the Lord of Hosts, also in Gleanings, and also in The Promised Day Is Come. And what I would do is do a word search, which you can do on Baha'i Reference Library. You can do it on Baha'i Library, or you could do it on Ocean. And this quotation is, we see you increasing every year your expenditures. That'll get you that whole passage, because that whole passage is composed of 4 paragraphs. Then the second quote I cited is from the Tablets of Baha'u'llah revealed after the Kitab-i-Aqdas, page 89. So if you have that book, you can find it. If you don't have that book and you want to look it up online, here is the phrase that you could use that will find it for sure. The House of Justice it is incumbent upon the ministers of the House of Justice. If you write that in, you'll find it. The third quotation is found in Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, as I said, and it's composed of 2 paragraphs. And the first paragraph begins with, "We pray God, exalted be his glory." Now, there might be another tablet that begins something like that. So you might want to use, "and cherish the hope." So we pray God, exalted be his glory, and cherish the hope. That should get you the quotation. Also, that particular passage has a reference to the lesser peace. So you could just look up the lesser peace, and that would bring you to that third source. By the way, I was fascinated to find that The Guardian regarded this particular passage to be of such importance that he not only included it in Gleanings, but he also included it in The Promised Day Has Come. This is a major theme, actually, for the Baha'i faith. And sometimes when we say that we believe in universal peace, it sounds like a kumbaya. It sounds like we should all be nice to each other. But the Baha'i solution is much more practical, much more comprehensive, and really involves a responsibility of the leaders of the world. And I think that this is the reason why the Baha'is have been so supportive of the United Nations, because even though the United Nations is not yet doing that, is not providing that solution to conflict, it is the beginning of a process, and eventually they'll get there.
Thank you so much for that. So there's a question here. Angela Sterling has asked, is there a call for a coalition of countries to intercede militarily in the case of civil wars or genocides, for example? And I'm thinking, for example, the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda for genocide, or civil wars. I mean, America had its own civil war. Would such an international force get involved in these kinds of affairs?
I'm really glad that was brought up. My understanding of this is that Baha'u'llah wanted to address international conflicts first. But as he said, this is the lesser peace. This is the first step. It's not the most great peace. The most great peace is a comprehensive peace that will include every dimension of stopping war and promoting fellowship and unity. Now, as to the specifics of how this would be brought about to stop civil wars and to stop genocides, this, along with many other things, Baha'u'llah left to the Universal House of Justice. And when it's the right time, the Universal House of Justice will instruct the nations of the world that hopefully by that time are listening, how they need to carry out these campaigns to bring peace internally to countries. I think this is actually a very important thing for us to understand, that Baha'u'llah addresses many problems in the world by showing an example of how to do it and what is most important, what needs to happen first. And then he leaves the rest to the Universal House of Justice, because the House of Justice has been established to supplement his legislation with legislation that is needed at a particular time. So it may be that to stop genocides and to stop civil wars, that the House of Justice will enact legislation, which then will be carried out by the nations of, by those nations that have become Baha'i. And that thereby we will see this problem resolved, but then it might not even exist 100 years later. It may be the genocide will be completely a thing of the past, and also that civil wars won't erupt anymore. Because after all, civil wars require that there is some kind of armed force that can compete with your police force, your internal police force. And if you have a healthy internal military force, then that should prevent conflicts from arising. But as I said, all of these details will be provided when it's the right time. And it's also interesting that Baha'u'llah was addressing not some future, he was addressing the kings of his own time. He addressed epistles to the Tsar of Russia. He sent epistle to Queen Victoria and to Napoleon III. He was very, and of course to the Shah of Iran and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. So he was addressing the major world leaders, kings, all of them, and he was challenging them to implement this solution now. See, this is not again, it's Baha'u'llah is in the age of accomplishment. This is the age, the cycle of fulfillment, not the cycle of let's wait. Let's continue to wait forever. These teachings can be implemented whenever the leaders of the world will recognize their responsibility and do it.
Thank you for that. It's very important to reflect on. And as you talked about this subject of this unity of the world, and you even talked about the idea of its security and what a world would look like. You mentioned at one point this police force and effectively the arms control to not have a rebellion against such a police force. There's also, you mentioned this lower taxes in a society that doesn't need to spend on war. How do you know all these things? Where do I find out these measures that Baha'u'llah talks about to make a just and stable society, a global society that is? How do we look this part up? Where did you find that?
Well, though, excuse me. I commend to you these three passages for careful study. You will find in them very specific answers to all of these questions. And if they are, you know, Baha'u'llah's tablets are written on the basis of principles. So these are solutions expressed as principles. So he repeated in two of the passages that I cited, how the taxes upon the people of the different countries were always going up because of increased expenditures, and that this was a huge burden upon the people. So we can extrapolate from that and understand that one of the reasons why the lesser peace needs to come and that we need to abolish war is because it is having a very deleterious effect on every person. Every person. And when you think about it, that's even true of Americans. A big chunk of our incomes is taken up. And then look at the defense budget. It's huge. And in other countries, they suffer much more than we do because they don't make as much money. So they may be taxed at an even higher rate than we are, and they can't afford to be taxed at all. They're living so close to the line of survival. that they need to keep every last penny they can earn. So that's an example. And another example is when he talks about promoting the peace and tranquility within your internal realms and safeguarding them from what? If you're not safeguarding them from exterior attacks, because all the nations of the world are working together to solve that problem, then you're using those internal military forces or police people are there to promote peace and tranquility amongst the people. And so I think we need to look at all of these three passages and think really for ourselves, how can they apply to many different situations? And also, what I haven't quoted here is where Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi talk about this solution. I encourage you to look up those passages. One of the things you'll want to look at is the supreme, sometimes he calls it supreme, sometimes he calls it something else. But he talks about there's going to be a supreme body that is elected from all the nations of the world, and they will be responsible for keeping the peace. That's exactly what Baha'u'llah said. He said, all of you kings, because who was running the world at that time? Kings. We're talking about 1860s, 1870s. You should convene a gathering with representatives of every nation and address the problems of the world. The number one problem being war. Before you can solve the other problems of the world, you have to stop war. Because every time there's a war, we devote more of our resources that could be put into something more constructive. We devote those resources to defend ourselves and, or in the case of the aggressor, to conquer some territory. So you will, like I said, you will find them there. You will also find them in the references to this this body that is to be elected from representatives of all the nations. It's even found in the Will and Testament of Abdul Wahab, and it's found in other tablets. It's found in some of his talks. It's and of course the Guardian talked about it in a number of his letters. But also we're encouraged to think for ourselves. And so when we find statements with a matter of principle, if we really think about it, we can find all kinds of cases where that principle would have a transformative effect on the people and make their lives much more pleasant than they are currently. And certainly not having your young men and women conscripted for the army to go fight wars, that's a big one. Not having very high taxes to pay for wars and pay for armaments, that's a big one. And just to be able to live in peace and tranquility rather than in fear of aggression for your whole life, that's a big factor too. And it's interesting that Baha'u'llah speaks of this as justice. This is the right way to live. Justice is the way that things are supposed to be. It's not an exception. We've come to believe in, especially in the West, that wars are inevitable and that they're the natural condition for humanity. Oh yeah, we've always had wars. We'll always have wars. Well, Baha'u'llah says, no, you won't. You need to stop. And you need to stop now. And so whether that his statements are as relevant in this year of 2022 as they were when he first penned them in the 1860s.
So this is interesting. So you're saying Baha'u'llah wrote this And I'm not asking rhetoric just for everyone's sake. Baha'u'llah wrote all of this in the 1800s. Can you maybe give a sense of context, the 1800s versus now? Today, we live in a very, very global society. I mean, not what it could be, but still, we know that there's another place in the opposite side of the world that has people just like us. Whereas in the 1800s, I know it was a very different landscape back then. Could you shed some light on this subject, please, if you don't mind?
Our consciousness, certainly our consciousness as human beings has changed, but we're still holding on. We're holding on to old paradigms that have outlived their usefulness in many cases. And the idea that you should serve the interests of your nation first, that hasn't gone away. That's, if anything, that idea has gotten stronger in the last 100 or 150 years. And it's just like what we found with the old religions that are, in many cases, their key doctrines and their rituals and so forth were developed by fellow believers and not by the founder of the religion. So they're living a religion that's not really representative of what Jesus or Moses or Muhammad actually said. And we know that because we can read their writings. So we know what the original is. So there's all this sort of development of infrastructure, if you will, or superstructure in the case of these religions. And those religious orthodoxies have gotten stronger and they've weaponized, they've mixed their power with the power of politics and the power of military might. And so you have many countries now that are really religious nationalities. They're religious nations, I would say. And so we are in our situation now is actually more dire than it was in the 1860s. In the 1860s, there were wars taking place, all over the place. There were little ones. Generally, most of them were small ones, but the small conflicts still kill people, lots of people, disrupt people's lives. And so, Baha'u'llah also said that if his teachings are not followed, if they're not implemented, that we're going to face calamities that will become ever more increasingly devastating to humanity. Because of course, we're still on a progress curve. Humanity is still progressing, but we can progress in becoming warlike as just as easily as progress in becoming peace lovers. And so the question, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about this is how would Baha'u'llah address the problem of nuclear weapons? Because nuclear weapons, the existence of nuclear weapons are the principal reason why the nations of that area and the United States didn't stop the invasion of Ukraine. It's because the leader of Russia specifically said, if you interfere with me, I will use nuclear weapons. And that's certainly how President Biden read Vladimir Putin's intentions when he met with him. Because when he came home, he said, we must not provoke a further escalation of this war. Even though atrocities are occurring, even though the destruction of a wonderful country is ongoing, even though there are millions of refugees who are fleeing their own country, still, you've got to really watch it when you're playing with somebody who's a major nuclear power. And right now, Russia has more nuclear weapons than the United States. So they're not at all afraid of the United States as a nuclear power. So I've been trying to think this through, and I'm sure that there are other Baha'is who are addressing this in their private thoughts. But I don't think we have a solution. I think that this solution is such an important part of our survival as human beings that it will have to come from the universal house of justice. And we must be patient and wait until the House feels that it is timely for it to speak on this question.
Thank you so much for this. That's important to consider. And actually, you had mentioned a few things, and it's important to take things into perspective, but also remember a few things too. There's this quote from Shoei Effendi that says, "A mechanism of world intercommunication will be devised, embracing the whole planet, freed from national hindrances and restrictions, and functioning with marvelous swiftness and perfect regularity." It's very interesting because people have looked at the internet as this mechanism, and it very much is to an extent. There are, however, in the midst of the crises that are happening, bright spots, such as if you've heard of Starlink, where you have internet irrespective of where you are on the planet, and that source of internet isn't being controlled by the government that would otherwise restrict access to that internet. It's very interesting that this connectivity, as we have this destruction literally in front of us, a destruction of a country, you have this connectivity that was previously unavailable for free. Now it's available for free and it's being made more available. And I'm wondering what the countries are going to do that see the value in this communication, in not stopping communication and not censoring people because of the national agenda. It's very interesting to think about this because just as much as we've spoken about war and we've spoken even referencing nuclear weapons, we've also seen concurrently on the other side this building up of a system, or at least humanity's ability to see beyond what we have. And this intercommunication of humanity, it seems to be the secret for us to get out of that. Because how can we know that something is bad happening if people can't speak about it?
What I've observed over the last several years, I'm involved in developing a learning application related to books, related to reading comprehension. And so I've had a lot of contact, a lot of study of the various communication systems that are actually being used around the world. And what I've found is that these communication systems are created by and administered by people who are still immersed in nationalist paradigms. There's some of them who are globally oriented, but when push comes to shove, they tend to look at things through a lens that benefits them in their country. And this is particularly true of governments. As you all know, the internet is tightly controlled in many countries. And that means that they do not appreciate what they considered to be the American domination of internet. Perhaps most clearly demonstrated by the European Union sanctioning, taking to court, and trying to limit the reach of Google. They've been very adamant about this. They don't want Google to take over the European internet. They want the European internet to reflect their values, their priorities, their needs. And this is, of course, much more true of Russia, much more true of China, where it simply is impossible to use many of the browsers and other internet related software because they block it. And so we shouldn't believe, and I don't believe, this is an important thing. We need to understand that the change that is called for is a change in people's consciousness. What Baha'u'llah is calling for is that the kings think differently. And because they think differently, they act differently. So we often in America become quite enamored of our technology and think that our technology is going to provide the solution to our problems. But the reality is that it's the way of thinking that has to change to find a solution to the problem. And then the technology will help us get there. It's a servant for whatever aim we're reaching for. And if we wanted to imagine the good that the internet could bring, if any country, but in particular many countries, were broadcasting a lot of material that was promoting world peace and fellowship and interactions between different people. But one of our problems, just to bring up one problem with doing that without a change of consciousness, is that every country wants their language to be the language of the internet. And the language of the Chinese internet is definitely Chinese. The language of the Russian internet is Russian. Our language is English. And we perhaps naively hope or believe that everybody's going to adopt English. Everybody's going to take English. Well, what we don't realize is that many other nations have the same dream. You know, they believe that their language is the most wonderful languages in the world and everybody should adopt theirs. And they're very resistant to these hotshots in Silicon Valley who want to make sure that everybody speaks English with each other. And so they publish everything in English and make it pretty much impossible for somebody who's not someone familiar with English to be able to use the software or sometimes even the hardware. And I don't want to exaggerate this, but I think that it calls for a transformation in the way people think. And that's where Baha'is come in, because that's what the Baha'i faith is all about. Everything that Baha'u'llah revealed is about changing our consciousness from this parochial, nationalistic, very limited, sort of armed bastion. You know, we considered ourselves in the past to, we're a safe haven in our country. And then those guys over there are threatening us. And every country considered themselves that sort of safe haven, which has to live in a fortress to defend themselves from the world. And Baha'u'llah is saying this is over. It's done. We need to transition in our heads and realize that we belong to the planet and we belong even to the cosmos because we're connected to the manifestation of God, who doesn't even live here anymore. He came for a visit, but now he's in some other spiritual realm. And to have that consciousness that there are myriad worlds created by God, and all of them are meant to work in a harmonious and love-filled manner. And ours, apparently, it seems that ours is the only one that is still engaging in a violation of the principles of the Creator. That is breaking his law, because if we were following his law, then we would be loving rather than hating and killing each other. Now, I know there's some people out there, and I hope that you will, if you don't have a question, you're welcome to make a statement. react to something that I've said, react to something that Baha'u'llah has written.
So there are two actually. So
Oh, good.
Alex sent me a message saying, the precept, arise ye all against the aggressor nation, might be said to be conditional on the actual or the possibility to do so collectively, as in perhaps two or more nations arising against that one nation. So a precept only valid if and when they can do so. What might be the possibilities or lack of possibilities for observing that precept in the world today? Well, you mentioned one of them, such as the fact that you have nuclear powers. And perhaps in Ukraine, given the geopolitical situation. And he further adds, Alex adds, it seems like Baha'u'llah is encouraging a leader or nation to take unilateral initiative to arise against the aggressor. What role might initiative play in the greater plan of God in such manners?
To me, it's very clear from a straightforward reading of these passages. And I believe that in many cases, Baha'u'llah is speaking in very practical terms that all of us can understand. Yeah, of course, there's some of his verses that are metaphorical, that use beautiful, emotive language that can carry us away, particularly the prayers are like this. But in his tablets revealed after the Kitab-i Aqdas, he addresses a lot of legal issues and a lot of issues pertaining to creating and ameliorating the functioning of a society. So I believe that Baha'u'llah is very adamant that this is a united effort. This is not one nation or a bunch of nations getting together and doing something. It's all nations. And so I don't think that he would have phrased it in the manner that he did, where he says every nation needs to participate, unless this was essential to the to providing the solution. And by the way, it just occurred to me now that one of the main reasons why we have acts of aggression happening, that there are wars happening, but particularly to look at it from the position of that somebody started it, is the fact that the nations aren't united. If we were all united, all of the nations of the world, would any leader even think of invading another country? We will never know that until we try it. And I love, there's one of Abdu'l-Baha's talks where he says, why don't we try peace for a while? We can always go back to war.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So there is one question from Dana C. Her question is, what can be done right now by us watching this to help alleviate the suffering and devastation of those right now that are refugees of these wars?
Yes, well, Baha'u'llah addressed that also in one of the tablets. Let me see if I can bring that up. And you know, sometimes I switch screens. Let's see. I believe he did address this. Let's see. Well, I'm not. Oh, here it is. The first one, my friends. First one. Look at the next to last sentence. Should anyone seek refuge with you, extend unto him your protection and betray him not. Thus doth the pen of the Most High counsel you as bidden by him who is the all-knowing, the all-informed. So you've got the answer right there. And I think that his statement of principle here is confirmed by our hearts. When we hear that the people of Poland have welcomed in 2 million refugees from Ukraine, we get choked up. We think, what a phenomenal country to have done this, to have to sacrifice so much to take care of these poor people who are fleeing, a malevolent attack on their whole way of life. And I feel the same sense of emotional connection to anybody who does it. And the news has been reporting lately that the administration is expediting the all applications for refuge from Ukrainians at our border, because there are a considerable number of them who are flying into Mexico and making their way for the US border. And that's good to hear. I'm very happy that our government is doing that, because these people they've lost everything in many cases. And they don't even know if they'll have a country to go back to. So we must take care of them. And so how can Baha'is do something about this? When the Ukrainian immigrants come to your town, go and offer something to them. Offer to teach them English. Offer to help them to furnish their apartment or help them to get a job. If we really help those people, then we are participating in providing refuge for them and protection. So that's to me the clearest answer. And soon, I'm hoping we will. Many of us will have Ukrainians living in our towns, and we'll have that opportunity to serve them, to take care of them, to aid them, to show them that we are their brothers and sisters.
That's very, very, very powerful. Thank you for sharing that, because that's an important role that we can play here and now. It's taking care of these refugees. It's helping them, tending to their needs. And we can see an example of that in our exemplar, Abdul Baha. He did just that. He took care of the people in his time when they were going to starve otherwise, and made sure that people were fed during a British blockade during the war, the World War I. Now, there's another, just taking inspiration from Abdul Baha, there's another point that Abdul Baha makes, that when we have this equality between men and women, that wars will cease because women won't allow their sons and daughters to go off into war. What say you of this?
Well, again, this will require a change of consciousness, because women, for the most part of the recorded past, have not engaged in war, except in some sort of support capacity for their husbands or their brothers or their fathers or their male children, their boys. And so that was, and they were also supporters. Because they were supporters, they didn't feel empowered to advocate for peace, because they were supposed to be supporting their husbands and other relatives who believed that the war they were fighting was just. And where you would see a change is if women's consciousness were to be so transformed that women as a block, not just 2 or 3 over here and 4 or 5 over there, but as a block would be insisting on peace. You see, that would be half of humanity insisting. And so it might take the guys a little bit of time to come around. But this is another way to the lesser peace. If the women of the world arise and say, I'm not supporting war anymore, then it would work. It would work. But as long as women are disunited on this, they can't have that kind of impact. Now, some individual women have worked for peace and been very influential in alleviating some suffering. But again, there's this emphasis in Baha'u'llah's writings on unity, on doing something together, all of us. The power that we have when we are united together is so much greater than anything else. And like all of the kings arising together in unity and all of the women arising in unity, those are forces, potent forces that cannot be resisted. But if it's only a few here and there, that's not the unity of women or the unity of kings or the unity of rulers. That's simply a few individuals. And that's what we've been dealing with for thousands of years. We've always had people who believed in bringing peace, but there've been very few. And it can't just be one nation either, because of this principle that Abdullah talked about, that, you can have lambs, but they're going to be vulnerable. They have to have a protector. And so there are a number of nations now where women have become combatants, including ours. I lived in Israel for a while, and the women make up an important part of the Israeli army. And they're not treated very differently from the men either. And they perform on the same level as the men do. So in order to create peace, for women to be the standard bearers of peace, the women who do believe in that need to convert the rest of women to that, so that we don't have mothers who, who are proud of their loved ones who die on the field of battle. There are plenty of countries where people do that still. And we'd have to have, again, a change of consciousness. And that is a big part, I think, of implementing this principle of the equality of men and women, is when women can show unity on a global scale, they're going to be taken very seriously by men.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's about time for us to wrap it up for today and really say thank you for coming and presenting this to us, the position of the Baha'i teachings on attaining this desired world unity and stopping wars. This is extremely important and definitely not something to take lightly. If you heard lightly, I may have said that. It's not something to take lightly. And most importantly, it's something that Baha'u'llah lays out, as you had mentioned, Peter, very clearly and pragmatically and practically. So that all being said, there are resources for all of you to read, and we've mentioned some of them in this video. We recommend you to visit our website, clearwaterbaha'is.org, and to explore the article we have on the blog for this talk today. That being said, it is May 1st. It is Sunday, May 1st, 2022, for your reference. And that should be around the time it's posted anyway. That being said, there's nothing left really to discuss on my end, besides just asking if you have any final thoughts, and then we can maybe close with some remarks on this travesty.
So I want to again thank you for taking an hour and a half out in your day, in your Sunday, to come here and listen and learn from Baha'u'llah. And the paper that I've written is really quite short. I think it's 2 or maybe 3 pages long. I will be sending it to John and Jeremiah. And if you will, if they have your email addresses, then they could send you a copy of it. And it wouldn't take them very much time to do that. So that's what I would recommend if you would like to be able to find these passages. And also if you'd like to respond to my reflections on them, because it does end with some correlation between the different passages. I always welcome comments from people. I prefer to hear from people who disagree with me. And the reason why is because I learned something. And I think it's very important to be constantly learning and never thinking that you've reached the end of your search for truth, because if you do, then when you go to the next world, you're going to be really surprised to find out that that was not the case. There's much more to come. So thank you again for making that time. And if any of you are really interested in studying the Persian Bayan, please get in touch with Jeremiah or John and to find out how you can join the class.
Thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a beautiful Sunday. It is, again, a very important subject, not the happiest, but an important one. We hope you can investigate this yourself and share with your friends. Thank you very much.